Hello security people, welcome to the our next Security Espresso OX23 edition. I'm sure you wondered what happened to Security Espresso, why haven't anything happened in a while, but I'm assuring you that we're back even after a while, and we're going to continue our meetups as frequent as possible. It's been a terrible, maybe not a terrible few months, but more difficult than usual. But life finds a way, so business goes on for anyone, and everyone found a way to work. Most of few people probably work remotely, so we'll hold this virtual meetup remotely as well. Today we'll have two speakers, and the first speaker will be Stefan Nikula he's a senior threat researcher at Avira Protection Labs, and he'll present the principles of heap-based exploits on Windows 7 and 10 on 32 bits. And the second presentation will be an OPSEC guide for the security enthusiasts, held by Dan Demeter, security researcher at Great, and Marco Prius, director at Great. After our presentations, we'll have a virtual beer in Discord, so this is quite important. The policy is BYOD, so bring your own drink. It's quite mandatory for the virtual beer, so don't miss that, please. You'll find the link for the beer in the description of the video, as well as on the Telegram channel. And if you have any question during the meetup, please address all your questions on Telegram, and I'll ask the speaker live, and we'll see your questions answered. So without further ado, I give the word to Stefan Nikula to start his first presentation. Stefan?
Thank you, Anatol. Hi everyone, thanks for joining. It's great to present at Security Espresso. My name is Stefan, and I guess I'll be presenting key-based exploits on Windows 7 and 10. Let me quickly share my screen.
Yeah, it's good.
All right. Awesome. I think you can now see the presentation. Great. So, some things about me. I work as a senior threat researcher at Avira Protection Labs inside the vulnerability detection team, which is a new team founded that basically targets security research, exploit development, and zero-day hunting. I have a penetration testing background, and also in private bug bounty and freelancing, and I am passionate about exploit development, vulnerability research, and Windows internals. Since I started doing penetration testing, I was fascinated about the entire life cycle of discovering and creating software exploits. So that's how I started in this area. Now, to give you a little bit of context about what we will be covering today. So we will be mainly speaking about, in the first part, about the Windows Heap Manager. And we will touch subjects such as Backend Allocator, Frontend Allocator, and the basics of the heap management. We will also discuss about Internet Explorer internals, along with debugging and an example of an exploit. And we will wrap things up with some conclusions. Also, as a note, the concepts presented here are high level. We mainly scratch the surface. And I will be attaching references for in-depth analysis for each and every single subject that has more depth to it. So, the Windows Heap, we're starting things off with the Windows Heap Memory Management, specifically the userland. We all know that we have the stack and the heap. Some particularities for each one of them. Each thread has a stack, and we use mainly the stack for local variables, say return pointer addresses, structure exception handlers pointers, and we also have what's called the guard page, which basically reserves our memory so that the stack size cannot grow beyond the limit. Whereas the heap, for example, the heap is a dynamic managed memory, which means that the heap needs some kind of manager in order to do its specific routines like allocating, freeing specific heap memory areas, or reallocating them. Also, if we look at the Windows 32 memory map, which is in our right, we can see the kind of the structure that Windows process has in terms of the memory. Anatol, sorry, can you perhaps mute the I think the phone or something? I kind of hear it in the background. Thank you. So this would be the Windows 32 memory map. And we can also note a specific structure that will be really come in handy during our heap spraying later on. So first of all, we have the stack, the heap, then we have the text, some DLLs, and finally the PE headers that were loaded in memory, and finally the kernel land. And regarding the Windows heap structure, the heap is based is organized in multiple segments. Each heap has segments, and each segment has chunks. We can also see it in the upper right corner. Here we have one example of heap which has multiple segments. Each segment can have is having actually headers, and inside the segment data we have chunks. And again, those chunks have headers and also data. You can also notice in the rightmost picture that the structure of the chunks actually, and each chunk has also, besides the header, has a flink and a blink. This might look familiar for you from perhaps the Linux heap structure. And this is basically a double linked list that takes the forward and the backward chunks and links them together. And regarding the application heap and the possibilities of a heap, we have two major components. So we first of all, the application asks for a certain memory size for allocating inside a heap, and it can do that by multiple ways, which all end up basically in either in the NTDLL, which has the Frontend Allocator, the Backend one, and the core heap, or they can go directly to the Virtual Memory Manager and obtain a handler to the allocated memory. And we will go and study a little bit on each one of them. So regarding the default process heap and the C runtime, we have multiple Windows API routines which we can use in order to obtain or create and allocate inside the heap memory. For example, from the kernel32.dll, we have functions such as heap create, heap alloc, heap free. Also from the C runtime, we have malloc or free, C++ with the new operator, and they all end up basically in the NTDLL with RTL allocate, heap, reallocate, and free. But we also have the second option to go for VirtualAlloc, and basically this allows us to directly communicate with the Virtual Memory Manager and obtain and allocate memory chunks at will. This will in hand give us a handler, and that handler basically points to the memory requested size. We can see, for example, that this implementation is usually done by mature applications such as Chrome or Mozilla, which are basically implementing their own heap manager. But for applications such as Internet Explorer, they are already using the default Windows Heap Manager and are not directly using VirtualAlloc for using the heap. So to give us a short summary so far, as we've seen, everything has some kind of management informations, which means metadata, headers. The memory consumption is managed as a list of chunks, segments, heaps. Programs can have even more heaps, not just one. And of course, each heap has segments and chunks, as we've seen before. Additionally, headers, among other things, contain metadata and flags, such as the state of each memory location, like if it's breezy, if it's free, and we will see that in our expose that I will be presenting. And also, if you want to use the Windows Heap, you have to decide basically between Windows Heap Manager, which means Windows APIs. So when you do a new allocator in C++, or when you use the Kernel32 functions, you are basically using the Windows Heap Manager. Whereas when you use VirtualAlloc, you are kind of implementing your own heap manager, meaning that you receive one header to a chunk of heap, and you manage it accordingly to your will, like implementing routines of allocating, deallocating, and freeing the memory at will. It's also worth mentioning that each Windows process, regardless of if it decides to use VirtualAlloc or not, each process has a initial default process heap. So, a little bit about the front-end and back-end allocator. Just to give you a short idea about what's going on, the backend allocator is the first one to allocate. So when I start allocating using the Windows API, we will interact with the backend allocator, and this is the default mechanisms for the free chunks. And it comprises in two elements: the free list, which is basically a list with free chunks, each sorted by size, and we also have a list hint, which helps us with references from the free list to find appropriate chunks to satisfy allocation, reallocation, or other requests. Whereas the front-end allocator, this one actually has an interesting mechanism, which is called LFH, low fragmentation heap. And basically it activates after a consecutive 80 to 20 allocation with the same size, but under a certain size. So basically when we allocate, it's like somehow like a caching or more like an optimization mechanism. And LFH allows us to group chunks into adjacent locations. But as a overview, as a whole overview, we should basically remember that the differences between the front-end allocator and the back-end allocator means that we have differences in terms of freeze, allocation, chunk management, and fragmentation. So when we allocate, our data might end up near other data that we control or not, depending on the allocator. I've also included some references down below. If you want to check out more about this, I suggest, for example, the Windows internals book, the memory management part, where everything is dissected to the last bit. A little bit about the Windows 10 particularities that we have. So starting with Windows 10, we see two heap managers, the anti-heap, which is basically the one that we discussed before, and it's similar to Windows 7. And we also have the segment heap, which is kind of optional, so processes need to specify that they want to include segment heap in their routines. And also, regarding the anti-heap, Windows 10 introduces a lot of randomization. So we now see a lot of spaces between chunks, and also we might see chunks in other segments linked between themselves. And for example, the flink and the blink can point into different segments. I'm not so sure about heaps though. And also segment heap does not use the adjacent chunks anymore. We need to discuss also about the heap integrity protection. So up until Windows 7, we kind of had the opportunity to cause a heap overflow, for example, and start smashing the heap metadata corruption, to start smashing the heap metadata in the headers. Whereas in Windows 7 and up, certain header fields, like chunk headers, heap headers, and segments, are now encoded with a key. So this basically prevents us from smashing the headers, the appropriate headers of chunks or segments, let's say. We do have a workaround for this, and this is basically done by preventing the Windows Heap Manager from traversing the smashed header. Because if you want to implement some kind of integrity protection, you have to know when to trigger the scan. So you cannot be doing you cannot be traversing the heap each time or at every single second. So you could probably traverse it when it's being used. So to give you a little bit of comparison between the Windows 7 and Windows 10, Windows 7 basically is really reliable in terms of heap spraying because the heap memory is deterministic, which means that we control contents at predictable addresses. There's also the VirtualAlloc blocks, which provide exclusivity, which means noise suppressions. VirtualAlloc blocks are basically chunks allocated through RTL allocate heap, but are not stored in segments, rather stored in separate chunks in memories. As we've seen in the previous slides, each segment contains chunks. Well, this one basically is a chunk outside of the segment. We also have heap granularity, which means that the allocations are rounded to a certain size. Whereas starting with Windows 10, we can see some reduced reliability in heap spraying, mainly because of the random gaps that are introduced between chunks. We also have more fragmentation, and the sad part is that WinDebugger heap futures are not all available for the segment heap so far. So, who's using the Windows Heap Manager? That helps us know what should or can we analyze. So a lot of B files are actually, and desktop applications are actually using the Windows Heap Manager when they start allocating using the C runtime functions or kernel 32 functions and so on. And we have an example, Foxit PDF Reader or native Windows services like SVC hosts, LSAS or CRSC.exe. With a mentioning that starting with Windows 10, these services are automatically using the segment heap. Even if it's optional, they already choose to use the segment heap. And we also have the Internet Explorer, and I think we will go with the Internet Explorer. So enough with the with all the boring stuff, and let's start some fun. Not the somewhat fun, but I think the nerd fun. So we will be using Internet Explorer mainly as a proxy. So for us to be reaching the Windows Heap Manager, we can use basically any other program or software that uses the Windows Heap Manager. We are not limited to the concepts here that I will be presenting here, and the principles do remain the same. But the Internet Explorer is a good choice mainly because we have JavaScript as the input. And this allows us a lot of input to be inserted inside through the Internet Explorer. It's relatively beginner friendly. It has multiple research papers and available proof of concepts. We can identify a lot of them available on the internet. And also it's important that because it uses the Windows default process heap, so everything is aligned at the start, and it uses, of course, Windows APIs. So in terms of debugging and the tools of the trade, we mainly have WinDebug, Bona.py, which is a utility script that automates some kind of some parts from the exploit development lifecycle, like searching for specific objects, dumping specific objects, or creating a ROP chain, and so on. And mainly IDA and Guidra, but these ones are optional. Because we have WinDebug, we can disassemble up until the point that we need to start working around some of the flows that we need to hit. And for that case, indeed, we need to use IDA or Guidra. Also, for debugging purposes, we need to rely on the page heap. Page heap or gflags.exe from the Windows debugging kit is essentially a utility package that enables users to more easily troubleshoot memory corruption issues. So it's somehow like the address sanitizer or bug ID, which basically uses also the full page heap if you have some experience with those ones. Also, IE uses the Windows Heap Manager, so we need to be careful on the Windows APIs. And for this particular specifications, we should be using hooks to RTL functions in order for us to log the frees and the allocations. So as we've seen previously, all the process allocations are going through the NTDLL. So by hooking the RTL functions, breakpointing on the entry point and on the exit points, we can gather the information and then resume executions. And I've also included some reference for this part. Very simple and dumb example of a user after free is basically this one, where we start allocating pointer to an address of char array of 20. We delete the pointer and then we try to access the already freed memory. And in this case, the memory will not be accessible. Use after free basically will allocate in between the delete, in between the free and the use. We will allocate a new chunk of the same size, which will take the place of the first one that's being freed. And then when we access the P0, we potentially overwrote it with R in this example, and we can start using it as a full memory. And we're gonna kick things off by analyzing the CV 2020, which is basically a use after free vulnerability inside the C button object. I also placed here the Metasploit for those of you who want to try it or to study it. I've also placed here the Metasploit link. And when we run the HTML proof of concept without the page heap, we can note that we have an access violation, the program breaks, and the IP is kind of zeroed out, so we don't have any information about what happened. As a spoiler, EDI is the register that has the memory that's being tried to be accessed. And if we take a closer look at EDI, we can see that it has size 58 in hex, and it's in the free state. And we also can see that here, that the LFH that we talked about earlier is activated along with the free. As a note here is that always when using WinDBG and analyzing heap exploits, you want to attach the WinDBG not to run using WinDBG, as it will modify some heap properties and other P flags, which can interfere with your exploit and your proof of concept. So with this in mind, without the page heap, just running the proof of concept crash, it kind of looks like this. And when we run with the page heap, which is done by using the gflags executable from the Windows debugging kit, we can see a lot more information here. So now the IP has an address. We also see where the crash has happened, which is on the function onload status done. And we also see here the usage of the memory that's being freed. So for example, here we try to move into EGX the address of the EID, and this one points to freed memory, which is a memory corruption issue. We can also inspect EDI and see what exactly has been happened to that memory address, and among other Windows API calls, we also see the call of the destructor in this case from the C button, and then immediately after the heap free and the whole routine for this memory starts to free the memory chunk, and we end up with EDI pointing to a freed memory space area. Okay, let's continue by unassembling and looking for any possible use after free usages. So here, much like in the previous slide, we can see here what happens after we try to access the freed memory. We have a push here, we have some moves, and then after the moves, we also have a call to EAX with the offset DC hex. So because we will move the freed memory area inside EAX, we after that call it, we might have a chance here at exploiting it. But as an important mention here is that usually in a use after free exploit or any other heap memory corruption, we don't normally look for calling the UAF or immediately executing for UAF. Usually use after freeze or any other heap exploits rely on mostly memory leaks. So first of all, we need to try to obtain some memory information, try to go with the flow rather than, and skip this call, for example, rather than, if possible, taking it. But in our case here, will be taking the call, and we will see in the next slide what we will try to achieve. So we know that the freed memory area is exactly the size of 58 hex, and we can try to now replace the freed memory area by using some kind of allocator. I choose, for example, to create a document div element and then assign the class name to size 86 bytes plus the null terminators, which will result in 88 bytes, 58 in hex. So basically this this code right here, which will be inserted inside the HTML POC, will actually help us replace the freed memory object area. And we can see that here, that after we try to replace the freed memory, we can actually control the EAX and also control the call. As you can see right there, we are now trying to access the 41, 41, 40, 42, and so on, because this was basically the EAX plus DC hex. So not exactly EAX, but we are quite close. We can also note that LFH is still activated, and now the EDI is busy, so which means that we were able to reallocate the freed memory area. So now we control the EIP. So we basically knew the size of the freed object. We managed to replace the freed object, and hence we control the EIP. The question here would be now, where do we redirect the EIP? Because we need some kind of address where we can start redirecting the execution flow. And the answer here would be heap spraying. So just to give you a little bit of information, heap spraying is not mainly heap overflow. Instead, it's a heap payload delivery technique, and it's mainly used to overcome ASLR, which basically results in us controlling data at a predictable. And we also have some requirements, like what should we use in order to allocate a huge number of memory chunks, and also we need to know the memory layout internals, like they will end up in the same area, will they have some kind of space between them, and this is the whole kind of Internet Explorer internals. And we can do this by actually triggering the VirtualAlloc blocks, which I've talked about previously, and that helps us by allocating a big chunk, a big portion of the heap with our own data. And our will be something like this. So we will first have some fill, we'll have some nopes, some alignments, and then our shell code. And also we should remember the Windows memory map. We do have ASLR enabled for each module. However, the default ASLR model for Windows is basically the first 2 bytes that are constantly changed, depending also on the aggressiveness of the ASLR model. But despite the ASLR, we still respect the memory area, still respects some kind of, and the heap will be, and the stack will be the ones first. So after research, we can basically conclude that 0C, 0C, 0C is the sweet spot that will land exactly in our heap spray. And before starting the heap spray, we also need some allocators, and by that I mean heap spraying should use some objects in which size and content we control, and we can repeatedly use those ones. So for example, a simple deprecated example that does not work anymore, but it used to work on Internet Explorer 6 and 7 is a simple string, and the size of the string will get, and the content of the string will get directly allocated mechanism. So this would be just a simple example. But in our case, we will be using something different, and also this technique is called massaging the heap somehow, with a happy ending, I suppose. So we have the small block, which basically contains the repeated memory segment that we are interested in. So we first have some junk in the front, which are basically 20s, so nothing really important. Then we have the chunk. This will be our 0Cs that we will be redirecting to according to our heap spray. And the middle chunk contains a knob sled, or a LED sled in our case. We also have a popret, some EIPs, rob chains, and the shellcode. I will be talking about this here in a second. And then each small block is contained inside a larger block, and that larger block has a certain length, which this length is linked to Internet Explorer internals, and we spray this this large block for a certain size. We can also note some hard-coded offsets here. These offsets are basically from MSVCRT DLL, and I will be speaking about this right now actually. So the rob chain uses heap spraying and also uses the MSVCR71 DLL, which is a non-SLR module. In Vista and Windows 7 with Internet Explorer 8 and 9, the Java runtime environment 1.6 injected automatically that DLL in each process, including in Internet Explorer. So we can basically abuse this one. And also the GRA was a common, let's say, common software to be installed on your system. So you could basically find this DLL almost in any software. And back at that time, it was pretty reliable to develop a rob chain based on MSVCR. We can generate a rob chain using mona.py, and this is basically the command used for generating the rob shell. The rob chain, will basically have a call to virtual protect that will make our stack executable because it has the NX flag set already. We'd also mention here that the rob chain needs to be modified, and it will not basically work from the start. And we also have here some references. Besides the rob chain, we also need the stack pivot. So if you have a look, another look at the access violation crash that we've seen previously. So we control EAX, we now control also the call, which will set the IP to a certain address. But our ESP is pointing to the wrong direction. It is pointing in the heap actually, and we want it to point at the edge of the EAX, where our entire payload will reside. So in order to do that, we can also again abuse the MSV DLL with no ASLR protection, and we can search for a heap to stack pivot. For example, for this one, for FC34, we have the exchange EAX ESP and then return for the next call. So basically, if we point our EIP to this one, we will make ESP point to our payload exactly. So this is how this is kind of how our whole payload will look like. So as we've talked about, what we see here is a small block which is repeated over and over inside larger blocks, and those larger blocks occupy a huge memory inside our heap, and that's our heap spray. And here we see the small block and what it contains. So we have here some 20s, which are basically the fills. In red here, we actually have the IP. So it's our 0C0C plus the DC hex. If you remember, that was our initial clash. So here would be this will be where the EIP will be pointing, and the EIP will be pointing to FC34 8B05, which is exactly the stack pivot initially that we've talked about, and that exchanges the EAX with the ESP. So now ESP will actually point somewhere around here. So this will be where the ESP will be pointing to at. Now we return to the next address. After the exchange, we also have a return. So the return will take the first address from where the ESP is points at, and we'll execute it. So now this whole memory area, which is shown with orange, is actually a red sled. So all it does is that it constantly executes red up until this point. And this memory area, FC343866, is a popret. So basically, we went on the red sled and we ended up here. And now we need to jump the initial exchange EAX, because if we don't jump it, EAX will be ESP will actually be again pointing to another address, and we will start a unlimited iteration here. So now with this one, at this address is actually a pop and then a ret, and from here on we have our ROP chain and then our shellcode. So somewhere around here we'll end this. We'll end our ROP chain, which basically activates the VirtualAlloc and removes the NX flag so that we can execute the shellcode on the stack. And from here on, we have the call.exe shellcode. And I also prepared a POC video. Let's hope it works. It's pre-recorded, so I think it will work. So here we basically access the HTML and the call.exe will execute. And it will actually execute twice because Internet Explorer tries to recover and reload the web page once more after it caches it. So a sneak peek about some other topics, other more advanced topics that we are planning on discussing in a future presentation would be a double free, for example. And in this case, we have another CV, and I've attached here the exploit. And this one, if you take a look at the exploit, at the public exploit, which is also available on Metasploit, you will see that it uses again the heap spraying and the ROP chain with the MSVCR DLL, which we also use here. However, we can also improve this exploit, and we can now adapt it by using other techniques. And here we also see the crash. So again, this is with the page heap enabled. In the crash here shows us the exec function being the one that calls the crash, and we can also see the disassembly that is actually happening behind. So here we have the crash at move EDI, the word pointer EDI plus 8, and then after a couple of instructions we also have another call, just like in our example, but this time the call is with EAX plus 8. Now, if we take a look at the structure of an object, we can see that the object plus 8 offset is actually referenced to a private release, which is the structure of the objects. So we can basically turn this use after free, which was initially, into a double free exploit. So we can basically populate the to reallocate the freed memory area with pointers to objects that will contain, that will in terms will follow up and execute a constructor or destructor call. And this will actually lead us into memory leaks and further into something else. But that's a topic for I think for another presentation. So before wrapping things up, some effective memory protections would be the previously named Microsoft Emmet, which is now Windows Defender Exploit Guard, that basically helps detect heap spraying, detects stack pivot, and also depth bypasses using Windows 32 API calls, as we've just seen before. So all of these require some kind of bypasses, and those can also be the subject for the future talk. As some conclusions to wrap things up, for each heap exploit, we kind of need to understand the heap manager that's being used, either being it the Windows Heap Manager or a custom built-in ones. However, the principles kind of remain the same. We have allocators, we have routines that we need to take care of, and we also have the memory corruptions, like some type of like, for example, in terms of use after free, you have some heap chunks that are freed and then reused again. So kind of, and we need to somehow reallocate them back again. So somehow the principles do remain the same. However, in a complex application, there will be a lot of noise, so a lot of compensation is needed. In our case, we only needed just one allocation in order to get back the feed memory area. But in some cases, in more complex application, you need to be either very quick in the reallocation or try to compensate the noise that's being made by the web application, by the application while running. Also, the Internet Explorer is very friendly for exploit development and also for fuzzing. The Windows 7 kind of is the starting zone, as it's very deterministic, as we've just seen, and we can easily start doing some reallocations and heap spraying much more easier. Also, in a future presentation, I'm planning on discussing about Windows EMET bypasses, some vtable pointer abuses, memory leaks, type confusion, and other more advanced techniques if you would also be interested. I think that's all from my side. Thank you very much for joining, and if you have any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. Usually at this moment the audience uploads, so I'm the only one can that can upload and you'll hear me.
Thank
But
you.
I'm sure everyone at home is clapping, and that's a pretty good guess, I think.
Okay.
So while other people will write us questions on the Telegram channel because they didn't yet, so I remind you, I'll have a question myself.
Yes, please.
So you mentioned that the Internet Explorer is very exploit friendly. My question would be: is the old Microsoft Edge as friendly? Is it a totally entire different beast? And what's the status of the new Edge that has WebKit?
Well, actually, that's a pretty good question. Thank you. So yeah, in terms of Edge, it uses a totally different approach, and it's based more on the VirtualAlloc. So it kind of uses its own heap manager, and also the new one, which is based on Chromium, is kind of using the Chromium right now. So basically, if you're doing exploits for Chrome, you will be also understanding what's going on with the Edge. Yeah.
Okay, but is that as simple as using Internet Explorer, just like you stated? Like, is it as friendly, or it's like a totally different thing? It's much harder and so on.
Yeah, indeed. Well, you don't have the whole visibility like you have. Of course, you have symbols for Chrome, for example, and I also think you have for Edge. But Internet Explorer is more friendly in terms of the heap integration and also the default process heap that basically starts out with nothing, with not a huge load of allocations on it, and it's basically quite quiet. Whereas the custom ones, you have to understand the more complex routines that are applied by them. So it's different from that case, and also the research is much more different. Plus, for Internet Explorer, you can also try some proof of concepts or some ideas using basic C programs. You just compile some. If you want to, for example, to test a certain heap spray, you just compile it one on C code. You see how the memory area is doing, and then you can apply that in JavaScript. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. The input from JavaScript is a really convenient thing, and especially because you can attack remotely basically anyone who visited your link, and that's like a huge leverage towards the attackers. Okay, thank you, Stefan.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to invite you to our Telegram group because I'm sure a lot of people will have questions, and uh, the conversation can follow there. Besides that, don't forget to visit our virtual beer. So if you don't have yet Discord, install it. It's basically a web browser because it's Electron, so you'll be it will be familiar for you.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yep. I'll see you on the Telegram and Discord.
Okay. Thank you. So we'll take now a short break, 5-10 minutes break, and we'll see afterward. We'll see you afterwards with the second presentation. Welcome back. I hope you grabbed another beer because we have one more awesome presentation here. So for our second presentation, we have Dan Demeter and Marco Prius from Great they'll talk about OPSEC and how should you keep your devices and everything safe while you're at home, while you're traveling, and so on. Dan, Marco.
Hello, everybody. Marco, you're here?
Yes, hello. Thanks for having us. I'm Marco. Dan and me, we're from GREAT, which is the Global Research and Analysis team at Kaspersky. Just as a brief introduction, we're a global team, as that's what the G stands for, of highly specialized experts. Our main day-to-day job is investigating APTs, highly sophisticated attacks, but also some of the topics besides. Today, we're going to talk about some topic, especially Dan and me are highly interested in, which is OPSEC. Dan, let's kick it.
Okay. So thanks a lot for this kind presentation. Thanks a lot, guys, for joining today. My name is Dan Joe. This is Marco Doe, and we'd like to start with a quote. Basically, you know, everybody should have read like Art of War. Some people say it's overrated. Some people say it's like it's amazing. It has like a lot of quotes, so you might know this one. But from our experience and based on our knowledge, there are a lot of books about war, but are there a lot of books about cyber war? Well, during one of our meetings, Marco interestingly said the following quote, and he said, if they make one mistake, you can catch them. If you make one mistake, they own you. And this is pretty self-revealing, you might say, because the idea is that you can be like super protected, you can be like extremely cautious, but if you do one mistake, then you're done. Like your entire your identity might be revealed, your location might be revealed. So what we want to present today is we want to talk about OPSEC, like operational security. We want to talk about, in the first part, we want to talk about like software operational security, like let's say some people say internet hygiene, like what should we do, what should you do like while browsing the internet, like what are the caveats, what can you do, etc., etc. Then Marco will talk about in the second part of our presentation about like the physical security, which it's some sort I've seen in our community not being focused enough on. Anyway, well, I would like to start with pointing out, I'm not bashing on any apps or anything. I just want to point out some of the bugs and exploits that have been discovered in the past years. And, a lot of users are using WhatsApp. And there was like this exploit. You might have heard about like there was also some exploits from NSO, which is like an Israeli firm. Basically, there were a lot of exploits that were trying to either attack like the app or get access to the phone, then try to focus journalists, try to focus on activists. WhatsApp was not the only one. Zoom is also, which gained a lot of popularity like back in the days. One second. Oh, okay, sorry. My back hurt. So Zoom also gained a lot of popularity back in the days. It was like back actually now, like back in the past months. It also was vulnerable to some exploit. They could gain access. Hackers could gain access to the microphone and camera. They were able to disrupt the calls. Sometimes there was bad programming, like for example, or bad or lack of knowledge from users. For example, there was this screenshot tweeted by UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and he like tweeted his Zoom call with other ministers and important people, and you could see like the Zoom ID, and basically theoretically you could have joined their call if it like assuming it didn't finish yet. So like there was this kind of like shenanigans. Skype was also impacted. I don't know that many people using Skype right now, but there were cases with Skype having flaws. So we in Great, we focus on APTs, on powerful attackers. And like we have like at the team, in the team, we have we've been working, tracking APT actors for more than 10, 11 years. And what we've known so far is that the most powerful APT actors have a lot of capabilities. They have capabilities of monitoring the internet traffic. They have capabilities of monitoring specific chat applications. They have capabilities of monitoring phone calls or SMS messages. They can do like some attacks. I will talk about them a little bit later. In cooperation with different in different agencies, I wouldn't say law enforcement, but different agencies, there might be there might be nations which are capable of seizing devices at the border, capable of trying to intercept packets or intercept parcels on the transit and then injecting their malware. We've seen that in the Snowden leaks. So basically, laptops can be seized, computers can be infected, company servers may or can be hacked, and a lot of internet data flows and net flows and metadata can be collected. So what we want to talk about here is like how we can make it harder for them, and how we can make it like have a safety net, how you can improve your OPSEC. Well, let's focus on the email part. And clearly, we recommend using GPG or PGP. Well, the idea is that you can use and you should use only 4K RSA keys. Don't use 1K, don't use 2048 keys because they can be cracked. We assume that 2K keys can be cracked. We don't know for sure. 1K keys can be cracked for sure. Keep your keys safe. Generate your keys on an out-of-band laptop, offline laptop. Use them even better. Maybe have a YubiKey where you can keep your keys. Because if your key gets stolen, all your previous conversations, assuming that if somebody can steal your key, that entity can also focus on your computer. So basically, they can get access to your files. They can access with all your stuff. Encrypt your hard disk. That's very important. You have to encrypt your disk with BitLocker, with VeraCrypt, with Lux. You have options on Windows, on Linux, and on Mac. So that's very important. And of course, in your company, all execs managing sensitive informations, be careful, and they should be trained to also use encryption. In your organization, it's a little bit better because you can say, hey, let's use S-MIME. And that's okay because it's integrated in Outlook, it's integrated in OVA from Microsoft in Exchange, and it's like kind of like works out of the box kind of, and it's okay. So yeah, basically that's it. Now you might say, Dan, we don't have the luxury of using this in our organization, or maybe I'm a I'm a person and like a private entity, and I don't know if I can implement all of this stuff. So we recommend Proton Mail. Then if you like, we recommend Proton Mail instead of emails because it's pretty cool. It's like offers you like a high degree of encryption. It's better than standard email providers. If you can't do that, then you could at least try to use Gmail G Suite. Gmail G Suite basically for your organization is better because they have like a powerful let's say tools to manage your users. This is more like for organization, to manage the users, to manage on a lot of users, get reports, manage their two-factor authentication. It's pretty okay. In like the last case, I would recommend using encrypted emails on GPG, or you can use them on Gmail, you can use them on like Yahoo, but who the heck uses Yahoo anymore? You can use them more like mail.ru, yandex.ru, like any mail provider, and at least you have some encrypted emails. If somebody hacks into your account, those emails are encrypted. One thing we commend when is to not store emails on the mail server. So basically, we recommend using IMAP instead of POP3. Like clearly, POP3 should die in hell. But we recommend using IMAP, but all emails, any email that is like older than 30 days should be archived locally on your computer. So basically, you don't keep them on the server anymore. So let's say that email is safe, and what about calls? We recommend you not using phone calls like GSM calls at all. Like GSM is not encrypted. Mobile phone operators can intercept what your call. They can hijack, they can impersonate your calls. So they don't have, so basically calls on your mobile phone, they don't have authentication, they don't have encryption. And basically they don't have also confidentiality. So basically what we recommend is using Trima. Trima is pretty cool. It's like one of the best apps on the market. It's based in Switzerland. It's a Swiss company. It doesn't require you having a phone number to use Trima. That is like very important compared to other apps, because you might say, hey, Dan and Marco, we like Signal. We would like to use Signal. And we tell you, it's fine. That's pretty cool. But Signal requires to have a phone number. Well, maybe they don't anymore because they did a lot of changes. But you know, like having a phone number means that you can have like only one identity based one phone number. And you cannot, it's harder to remove your identity. And who knows your phone number knows your identity. On Trima, it's not like that. On Trima, you can create as many identities as you want, and you can ditch your identity. You can have your identity private. You can do whatever you want. So like, it's pretty cool. Telegram, I use it for sharing cat photos and talking to you guys on Security Espresso. That's like public stuff. It's not confidential stuff. I wouldn't use Trima for confidential chats ever. Trima has an encrypted chat. Apparently, it's encrypted. They say they use their own crypto, which, in my opinion, is a big no-no. They say, no, guys, you know, like we know what we're doing, yada yada yada, and you know, like it's another totally different debate. But again, Telegram uses like a phone number for your identity, so it's a big no-no. If you want to run your own cloud mail, like cloud conference call, you can use Jitsi, which is open source. You can roll your own server in the cloud, like it takes like 10 minutes. And basically you can do that one. If you want to talk like with somebody, with a source, you could use like instant messages, which are like truly anonymous. Because, for example, Trima or Telegram, they all leak the fact that you're using them. The metadata is leaked because you're connected to their server. Ricochet, on the other hand, is using Tor. So on Ricochet, you have your ID and you connect through Tor. So nobody knows that you're using Ricochet to talk to somebody. So that's pretty cool. This is how you set up Ricochet. Basically, you have like an ID which you give it to somebody else, and your partner gets their ID, and then you just input his or her ID, and then you just talk to him. Now, why we recommend these messages instead of like phone calls? Well, because there are like pretty well-known attacks, and you guys and girls, you might know about them. But I just want to mention them, like an SS7 attack, which is pretty interesting. Basically, it's taking advantage of the roaming protocol. When you go into roaming, like for example, you're from Romania and you go to UK, or you go, well, UK is not in a EU anymore. Let's say a EU country, you go to Bulgaria. And then you roam into a network. And then basically what happens, you connect to the network, but that network pings back to the one you have in Romania, like Orange, and then through the SS7 protocol says, hey, this number is located in Bulgaria. Please redirect everything to this location. I'm not an GSM expert. I don't know exactly how it works, but basically this is the gist. And basically the attackers, if they get access to an SS7 port, they could impersonate your phone number and they could say, hey, I think Anatol is Anatol is right now in Switzerland. Please redirect all his phone numbers to this location. And basically Anatol's phone numbers and text messages arriving to his phone number, they will be redirected to Switzerland. Another attack against the GSM networks are IMSI catchers. Well, they used to work pretty well with 2G, 3G networks. 4G has like some pretty good encryption. 5G, I don't know. Hopefully they do have like even better encryption than 4G, or not even encryption, but better security. And basically an IMSI catcher, it's a device that you go and you basically establish a BTS tower, and your phone connects to this tower because this tower broadcasts GSM network, which is like higher in better signal strength than the one that is installed by, let's say, Vodafone. So basically your phone, instead of connecting to the real Vodafone tower, it connects to the IMSI catcher, and then all your calls will go to the IMSI catcher, and theoretically you can hijack them, you can intercept them. Again, be careful if you see your phone downgrading to 2G networks, because that's kind of fishy. Like 2G networks are quite rare. Phones are not using those networks anymore. In some parts of the mountains, like this in Romania, in the mountains, I do have 2G networks sometimes. So yeah, there might be some things. What about text messages? Well, again, Trima works very well. Signal, you can use Wire, you can use also Ricochet for this one. And now let's talk about like your internet traffic. So let's assume your phone is pretty okay, you don't use any of these apps. What about your internet traffic? Well, we recommend using VPN providers, and you can find a lot of VPN providers on the market. We recommend the ones that are protecting your identity, your personal information, and which have like a good track record for not stealing your data. Because the danger with VPN providers, and that's the reason there are a lot of free VPN providers, is because I would say 99%, with certainty 99%, but you might say, Dan, you're wrong, and maybe I'm wrong, but like if somebody offers you a free product, you are the product then. And if somebody offers me a free VPN, it costs a lot to run the servers, do maintenance, take care of abusers, yada, yada, yada. And basically, I connect to something free, and then what do they gain back? Well, a lot of providers, and there have been cases with a lot of free VPN and non-free VPN providers, which are basically selling your data, selling your traffic, because you basically willingly redirect the traffic to their servers. They sell the data to like somebody else, and they make money out of you. So basically, that's why they were doing free one. So in theory, communication channels are safe, but you have to be careful, because you might have like the best, you have like 10 VPNs, like super good encryption, like over 2 Tor networks with like connecting from Starbucks network and Wi-Fi and like yada, yada, yada. But, you know, like if your phone is spawned, if your phone is owned, then the attacker, they don't have to like even try to break encryption, try to break to sniff your traffic. They can just see what you're doing from your phone. And furthermore, your phone will receive and send messages, but it will decrypt them. So basically, the attackers will get access to the unencrypted messages from your phone. So be careful and try to care about the things you use on a daily basis, like your phone and your laptop. So you have to be like, the biggest danger of happening, like what can happen with those phones in terms of like software and hardware, is that somebody can steal them, or somebody can deploy malware on them. And stealing them, you know, like it's easier than you think, you know, like if there's an attacker and it knows that you're living in Romania, an attacker with some money, let's say 20 euros, they can pay some bad guys to follow you. And then when you're in a dark alley, they just jump you and beat the shit out of you and they steal your laptop. That's it, no? So it's 20 euros is nothing. They can try to like other like entities, they can try to steal your laptop and confiscate your laptop at the border. Like, for example, in UK, if you refuse to provide them the encryption key, you immediately become a suspect. And because you become a suspect, you are forced to give them the encryption key, the password. If you don't give them the password, you get 2 years in jail. So this is like the Anti-Terrorist Act of 1999, if I remember well. So basically, be careful when you travel to UK, don't take your laptop with you, like, period. Evil Maiden attacks, I would not go into in depth about these attacks. If you would like to know what they are, I can explain at the end of the presentation. You guys know about Rubber Ducky, guys and girls, you know about Rubber Ducky attack, and I've seen a lot of people, actually, I've seen Anatol giving up prizes with Rubber Ducky, so like they're pretty well known here, so that's okay. Lastly, I just want to mention, I'm not trying to like advertise like Kaspersky or anything. Like this colleague of mine wrote this like pretty interesting article. I shared the link on the Telegram chat. And basically, in this article, Alexei discusses like the ways of an attacker moving data in an air-gapped network. And I think it's pretty cool because, you know, like people see that, oh, it's an air-gapped network, like nothing can go out or in. Like, well, you know, Stuxnet happened, you know, like that was an air-gapped network as well. So never say never. These are like pretty cool. It's a pretty cool read. I would recommend. Like, apart from that, I would say be like enable to factor whenever you can. Like a lot of services have this feature. Like if you use Gmail, a lot of you use Gmail. I personally don't like using Gmail. Dropbox, a lot of like Facebook, a lot of services have two-factor. But you know, like avoid using two-factor SMS. Instead, you can use like from effectiveness, like you can use Gmail, like Google Authenticator, which is basically generates OTP code, one-time password, one-time codes. It's a software program generating these codes. but we recommend hardware keys, hardware security keys, which are supported again by most vendors, and basically they generate an OTP, but it's in hardware. So it's like attackers, they need to actually get access to that hardware token in order to generate that code. A lot of banks are using those tokens, like RSA, for example. YubiKey also does those ones. So it's pretty cool. Because think about it, like if an attacker roots your phone, owns your phone, then I don't know, with like some 0-day or whatever, they could potentially get access to the Google Authenticator. And what's very important is that you could use also different email addresses. So you might have like a public email address that everybody knows about it. You might have it in your GPG signature. You might have it like emails in your GPG signature connected with your names from 1998, and you cannot delete them anymore. So yeah, that's a bummer. So basically your email address is now public. And you should use public email addresses and private email addresses. So an email address that is private, that you have it as you keep it as a secondary, as a backup recovery email address. You keep it for like important accounts nobody knows about it. And have a plan when somebody, like, think about it, like, what if somebody hacks me? Like, what if right now somebody would gain access to your email account? What could that attacker get? Well, at least for my part, that attacker would be able to get access into my online music training account. So, you know, like, I paid some money for that account, so I wouldn't want to lose it. But there are some, like, they could get access to my Twitter account. That's kind of bad, you know. Think about, like, maybe they might get access to your bank account. Maybe, depends. Like, banks in Romania, they have like pretty good security. So think about it. What would happen? There's like this famous XKCD, but I don't have it linked here, which, like, basically your email address is connected to a lot of stuff. So make it harder for them. It's just like it's an exponential curve. Put these like easy steps. On this way, maybe they might jump you over an alley and then like beat you up with a like a baseball bat, and then you tell them all the secrets. Sure, that could work. But in this way, in like software, it might be exponentially harder for them to attack you. So just be careful. Again, I'm not saying that we're not trying to hide. We just want to make it harder for people to abuse the information. And it's also about privacy, you know, like, it's nothing that I have something to hide. It's just that I don't want people to look at like what I'm doing. And basically, this is what we're doing here. Now, I would like to invite Marco, because he's going to talk about something really interesting and not discussed a lot in the industry. Hello, let me stop sharing my screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay, so everyone, sorry, we had a minor internet issue, but everything is back online now. So enjoy the presentation.
Okay, yeah. So as Dan was more focusing on like the software and so on stuff, I was digging more into the physical area, because that's quite interesting and often left out of scope, because people do care, of course, about things like encryption. But what about their surroundings? What about their environment they're in? And first of all, there is this basic rule: never leave your equipment alone. It sounds simple, but it's quite tough sometimes to do it. I mean, I just remember when I'm on a business trip and I even go into like clubs or restaurants and whatsoever with my backpack, with my stuff inside. Because then, only then, I can ensure basically who has access to it. And just remember, even a hotel room or whatsoever is not your home. It's not your property or under your control. Having that said that, let's go a bit into more specific tools. Nowadays, a lot of U cards, bank cards, identity cards, access cards use RF technologies, and the one or the other way. Especially NFC is quite popular and famous, but there are others as well. Think about if you don't already have it and you don't have the option to disable this functionality. There are blockers either to shield these kind of cards or even to create like a noise when someone tries to scan them. Because scanning in many cases is not that difficult, either reading out the data or even sometimes cloning the full card is possible. And this is definitely something to keep in mind because that's like in the public, easily accessible. Another thing I know people like wireless mouse, wireless keyboards, wireless devices around them, not directly connected, because who likes cables, right? But the downside of these things, of course, is that many of them are either not encrypted or can easily be read out, interjected. So definitely one thing to keep in mind. That's a common problem, and people in many cases are not really aware of that. It got lost track some years ago, basically, but we still have this problem. So think about what equipment you have, what you use, where you enter potential sensitive information. If it's maybe not better to use some wired connections, some more secure connections, or at least check which devices you're using and if they're properly encrypted and using standards which are proven to be good. But there's more, especially in terms of when saying cables. It's not only cool to just say, hey, it's wired dot. Even wired, like within cables, there may be some surprises you may not be aware of. There have been a lot of reports about different of such technologies, which nowadays can be built in very easily and cheap, such as this Turner P School from 2014, many years ago, and this was already $20, basically less, which enables remote attackers to gain access to a certain system or to communicate with already implanted malware, for example. There are more of these examples, the OMG cable or choose checking. Basically, there are within these cables and the adapters implemented RF receivers. Remote attacker up to several meters can communicate with and either try to directly attack the connected devices or to get information for exfiltration or to communicate with some third-party software. And you're basically not aware of that. So the functionality is completely okay, but these devices set up themselves to the computer as a human interface device and then gives the same capabilities to these devices. So always check if it's really trustworthy. And as you can see, they're made and they can be made pretty authentic. Several things you can do in order to cope with these kind of threats, especially in terms of USB. There are these so-called USB condoms, which basically kills the data transmission, which may not be easy for when you use interface devices, but for example with your phones, where it's just about charging, or other devices when you just want to charge them, maybe on your notebook, then you can use such devices, or even public sphere where you have like USB charging ports, to add an additional layer of security, of physical security, basically, to avoid any kind of data transmission you're not aware of or you don't like. As I said before already, with keeping your devices, many of these scenarios are especially interesting when you're traveling. And a hotel, and that's always important, or an apartment, anything you rent, it's not your property. Even though you rent it for like having a bed or shower, doesn't mean that you are the only owner and the only one in charge of this property. So think about if you have the chance to put out, for example, do not disturb, or to put out any other measures if you have left any devices in your room, which you shouldn't, of course, but if you do, to ensure who's entering your space, or to prevent if someone is entering your space. There are many ways, just thinking about hotel rooms, but also other public spaces, where some kind of either spy, surveillance techniques may be used. I just listed here some basic things. There are, of course, more advanced techniques. A very simple one you probably know already from movies are these two-way mirrors. Here's just a very simple example of how you may spot them, but this is also not a 100% indicator. So even if the sign shows you that it may be a regular mirror, it may be also just be a two-way mirror, but very expensive and complex build, because nowadays there are these possibilities. But it's just a very basic first step to see if your environment is safe. There are more, like for example, audio bugs you may, which are basically very easy to plan. They're super small nowadays. They run up for many hours. Either they directly transmit the information, or they store it locally, and they're really, really small and cost like nearly nothing. A very common methods to counter them are, of course, white noise sources. So either having running water, which nowadays may not be the best when you think about the environment, but you can set up FM radio or even on websites which transmit these white noise to fill up the spectrum and make it hard for audio bugs to record any usable information. Going further, spy cameras, that's quite an interesting thing, because in many different areas, not only on directly spying or surveillance, like powerful actors, I would say, but there are also other people abusing such technologies in order to get like video insights into private areas they shouldn't go into, of course. How to counter them? It's not that easy in many ways, but simple methods is using the reflection of the lens. There are certain tools you can use, like I've shown here in the lower left side, where you have LEDs flashing, and with the red filter, you can easier spot that kind of reflections. Going a bit more, you can use the infrared signals, because many of these hidden spy cameras should not only work during the daytime, but also during nighttime. So they need a light source, which usually is infrared. And some of even smartphones you can use to detect infrared sources. You may check this with your own smartphone if it's working or not. For example, with the remote of your TV, if you see the light lighting up. And with that, you could also try to spot such kind of hidden cameras in your rooms and your environment. A third and more advanced method would be using thermal imaging systems. There are even, like, let's say, cheaper ones you can use with your smartphone. Still, they cost some money, but it's quite interesting, because basically a spy camera and also other devices around you usually transmit some kind of temperature because they're running, right? And with that, you could also try to identify certain bugs or electronic devices and spy technologies in your, for example, hotel room or environment, wherever you're in. So that's quite interesting. Besides that, one thing which is always interesting, talking about notebooks, smartphones, tablets, and so on. You have integrated cameras, you have integrated microphones. Think about if you could either use tapes or something else to physically block them. Some have good methods already implemented, with some you have to do some manual work. But think about it, where you use these devices, what these cameras may see from you, from your environment, where you are, what you're doing, what may be recorded. To just be aware of your surroundings and your own devices you're carrying and using. For the next, it's important that certain techniques may not be allowed in all countries. So it's always wise, especially if you're traveling, to be aware of the local situation. Also, Dan mentioned it before, like when you're entering a country, there may be certain laws or policies applied when you enter it with certain equipment, or also in terms of using certain equipment in a country. But there are some tools which are quite small. You could use either to detect, for example, Wi-Fi cameras, which is not super difficult. You can use like any kind of tools, but there are also some very small ones, like the Spacehoon, for example. But you can also check, and that's quite interesting, for deauth packages when you do like checking the Wi-Fi. And you also can check like what countermeasures you can do against that. Wi-Fi nowadays is quite a very common channel, but not the only one. But it's very easy to at least gain a certain kind of control about it. Speaking about Wi-Fi, that's exactly leading to the one quite interesting point. It doesn't matter where you are, but usually you would try to use Wi-Fi when you have a notebook with you in order to do some like work, communication, browsing, whatsoever. Directly connecting to your devices to a public Wi-Fi may not be the best choice in all or many cases. So you may think about using additional devices which may help you protect your devices from other foreign networks. There are these kind of Wi-Fi routers. They're from different companies, easy to use, cheap. They have a lot of functionalities implemented. This is just like one example from GLINet, which are quite nice. But as I said, just go into the market. If you're traveling a lot, think about getting such kind of devices to have like one barrier in between, especially for also using VPN through these boxes for additional security. Some even enable Tor or other system services to be used. You have firewalls or even IDS, IPS functionalities integrated, and this would quite low money, it's like low investment. The power is not that huge, so you can even use it with most of your devices, just plug in. And it's a quite interesting thing to do when you want to protect in these uncontrolled environments. Putting the circle back to what I said in the beginning, with keeping your devices by you, if that's not always possible, there are methods, for example, from a colleague of us, Ivan, he created this boot check script, basically, which can check against even made attacks. So whether a hard drive may be powered on without you noticing. It's quite an interesting thing, which I recommend you checking it out if it's working for you, especially when you're traveling and you have not control about your equipment all the time. So this may be some software kind of tool you may consider putting in your portfolio and your tool chain for regular use. As I said, these were just a few basic examples. There are more to cover all kind of environments, of course, but this would like kill this whole webinar, I would say, because we would spend many hours on that. But basically, why I wanted to talk about this is to raise the awareness that not everything is just implemented in software, but you have to be aware of your environment as well. Think about it, be aware, stay safe. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask, reach out to us, and have a nice beer later on. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you, Marco. So for a question, I'd like to ask you, first of all, if you could go and quickly and dirty explain what an evil made attack is.
Okay, I can explain this one if you want, Marco.
Sure, go on.
So the idea is that you have a full disk encryption on your laptop. So basically, your entire disk is encrypted, and you require a password. You require to input a password when your computer boots. Now, this evil maiden attack was developed like more than 10 years ago, I think, and back then, at least the Linux didn't support encrypted boot partitions. And in short, basically what was then an evil maiden attack was assuming that you would leave your laptop unencrypted in your hotel room. And basically it was powered off, you leave your encrypted laptop, but it's powered off. So basically it's not turned on. You go for a party or you like go wherever, and then somebody comes into your hotel room because it's easy to get access to to your room. Let's say if there's like an agency or somebody bribes the maid, the person cleaning your room, and that person goes, picks up your laptop, and then install a malicious software in the unencrypted part of your partition, so on the bootloader. Of course, nowadays we have secure boot, we have like UEFI with secure boot, with TPM, so it's a little bit harder, but you know, there might be some exploits for this kind of stuff. So that person installs malicious software on your unencrypted partition and goes away. And then you come back to your room, you power on your laptop, you type in your encryption password, like to decrypt your hard disk, and then you do your job. But then that malicious software, which was installed on your unencrypted partition, records the password that you typed in. And then you like power off your computer and you say, let's say you go out again. Then the second time a person comes in, recovers what your password was the stored password by the malicious software. So basically they get access to your password, and then it makes a clone of your disk. That clone can be done also before in the first time accessing your room. So basically the attacker has a clone, like an image of your disk, and it has a full disk encryption. So it's game over. This is a nutshell the evil maiden attack. Nowadays, there are ways to basically to defend against this stuff, like what my colleague Ivan did. It's an interesting way. Secure boot is also an interesting way, or like it's a solid way. You should have like a TPM, with most motherboards have TPM modules, and the entire boot chain should be signed. So that's pretty good.
Okay, quick question. Are there all the laptop support? Do all the laptops support this kind of thing? Evil maid protection under Linux, or should I look for specific ones for this?
Marco, maybe you know. Oh. Maybe we cannot unmute Marco. We can't unmute Marco.
Okay. No.
Okay, we can hear them, yeah.
So basically, it's not an easy question, because that's different vendors, especially in the notebook sphere, have different own technologies implemented, and I don't really want to like recommend specific vendor, because that's sometimes also a bit religious. So if you care about this, you can very easily find out if a certain vendor provides specific security technologies or not. This also goes into main boards on a regular computer and so on. This really heavily depends on certain vendors of the devices.
Can I also be like a bit, let's say, out of the line here? Personally, I'm a big fan of ThinkPad laptops. Like, yeah, I mean, you might have seen me like with my ThinkPad laptop. So yeah, it's no secret. But what I can say is that some people posted on the Telegram channel, they posted like some secure laptops. And there's like a company in UK, or actually in Germany, there's a company in Germany which builds this kind of secure laptops. And they're based on older models. So it's not like a newest model, but they do have some really cool security features. Check out the channel.
Okay, thank you, Dan. And another question I would have is, you mentioned that the attacker would need access to your laptop 2 times in order to pull off this attack. Is it possible to do it only in one access? What I'm thinking is, since you had access to an encrypted partition, you could install any scripts there, and maybe you could write a script that after the decryption will backdoor the actual the actual encrypted storage which is now accessible.
So theoretically, you could let's say you pound the bootloader. So the bootloader is compromised. We've seen in the case of CompuTrace where they were like injecting like some executables into the Windows bootloader, like in the Windows system. So theoretically, you could have one malicious software which then injects some executables in the operating system, and then those executables will transfer out the encryption key. Because it's a matter of like, okay, how do you tunnel out encryption key? This is my reasoning.
I'm thinking more not necessarily tunneling out the encryption key, but installing something on the actual system, so the attacker might be able to access the system just from visiting, having access to the laptop for just one time. That's my thinking.
So basically you're saying rooting the disk, rooting the operating system, even though it has full disk encryption.
Yeah, because after you have access to the bootloader because it wasn't protected. Afterwards, you have access to the password, but with that password, you actually can decrypt and the bootloader itself will decrypt the partition. So in that case, you might be able to access it as well and write anything there. It's just a thought. We can discuss it later in the beer room.
Yeah, maybe Marco wants to add something. I don't know.
Theoretical possibles, theoretically possible, but I think that's not the core. I mean, basically, it's interesting at least to see if there was any activity, whatever happened later on, because the methods on using such attacks may vary as well. So it's not only about always like installing something. It's just sometimes it's just cloning. The question of the password may not be the case for all of these attacks. So it really depends on the specific why, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think with this we'll end our second presentation. And to our audience, thank you for participating in this meetup. We'll see you in the beer room on the Discord. Please join. The policy is bring your own drink, so it's absolutely mandatory to have something to drink. And let's discuss there further on the heap-based exploits and the OPSEC. Have a good one, guys and girls.
Have a nice evening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.